Dave Bolger here, and welcome to a special Had I Known. This week, we take one last look back at 2020 through the eyes of our guests. All right, a very special Happy New Year to each and every one of you. Happy 2021. We made it. I hope that 2021 is everything you wish it to be. I hope things get better. God, they have to. So as I mentioned, this one's a little bit of a different episode. You know, at the end of every year, there's always the year-end retrospective, and yeah, I'm doing one of those as well. Hard not to reflect on the year that's passed and think about what's been learned, what's been gained, what's been lost, and all in between. And it's hard not to think about what happened in 2020 as it relates to this show, because as I think back over what's taken place over the course of 2020, and there's certainly been a lot that's taken place, one of the few good things that came out of this year was, for me personally, this show. This show, in many ways, was born out of the craziness that was going on this year, particularly with the pandemic. As I've told some people, and I think I've said on the show before, I had no thoughts or aspirations of creating a show like this until I received an email from Sharon Rippey from the school asking alums of the radio station if they'd be interested in helping keep the station on the air by producing radio shows. And I guess that email came at the perfect time in the quarantine, in the early days of COVID, that I said, what the heck, let's give it a whirl. And in answering that email and agreeing to create a show, I developed this, which was essentially me sitting in my closet, hopping on Zoom, talking to members of the Hamilton community about their time at the school and what they've done since. Now, never in a million years did I expect anyone other than perhaps a few friends to listen. It's been beyond my wildest dreams of seeing and hearing the reaction from people. So thank you for that, and I'm incredibly grateful. And I'm incredibly grateful to have gotten to talk to so many of the people that I have. And that's what I wanted to do for this episode, is just look back on some of the great things I heard, some of the great people I've met, and some of the things I learned along the way. Now, we'll get back to new episodes next week. We'll get back to talking to more fascinating people from the Hamilton community. But let's go back and pick out some of the interesting and fun moments from the first about 29 episodes, I guess it's been. And now, as I mentioned, this all started in the early days of the quarantine, of this pandemic. And about a week in is when the Black Lives Matter movement really exploded again, and social justice became at the forefront of what we were talking about as a nation. And while I never intended for this show to be a platform to talk about major topics like that, it was impossible to ignore, and certainly impacted all of our lives and was impacting the Hamilton community. And that led me to connect with Professor Mark Cryer, who shared some great words of wisdom about how to think about what was going on in the country at the time, and more importantly, some words of wisdom on how to think about race, not only now, but in the future. So here's Mark Cryer.
What we do know is that the awareness is much better. It's heightened. People now have a stronger sense of, when African Americans talk about police discrimination, people now have a stronger sense of what we're talking about. You saw it. You saw a man get killed on videotape. There's no question about it. There's an officer's knee on his neck and he dies. Okay? So now that scab has been pulled off. So that sense of awareness is heightened. It's greater now. So when people talk about police brutality and discrimination, there's a stronger case. There's a stronger sense of that. That's a reality. That's true. It's systematic and it's real. And what's most rewarding to me when I see the protests, I see America. I see people of every race, creed, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation out there saying enough is enough. And that is what gives me hope, because our attention span in this country is about 5 minutes. And I was
Yep.
wondering what it would take to move us off of the coronavirus. Well,
Yep.
okay, discovered what that is. Now
Yeah.
we're going to discover what comes next. What's going to
Right.
move us off the current media session, or what's going on in the country,
Right.
the protests. And so our attention span is not very long in this country. And what I teach in all my classes, I ask my students a real simple question. How long is your anger? Seriously.
Mm.
Are you going to be angry long enough to find a proactive, positive way to address this issue? Or is it going to be gone in 3-4 days until the next racist incident? Then you get fired up again, And so if something makes you angry for long enough, then do something, but be positive about it and proactive about it so you can try and make a difference so that the next time it happens, and unfortunately it will, those around you will be better schooled and have better knowledge of exactly what's going on, and just a greater sense of understanding. Most of the racial issues we have in this country, I believe, are born out of we don't know each other. We still look at each other as the other, and it's like, I got a house just like you. I got a mortgage. I got car payments. I got a wife. I got a cat. I got, what I mean? We all live the same lives. We want the same things. We bleed red blood. I mean, we're all human beings, part of the same race. And
Right.
we forget that too often because we look at each other as something unique or the other.
How long is your anger? That was important back in June when we recorded that conversation, and it will forever be important. And 6 months later, it's certainly important. So how long is your anger? How long is everyone's anger? And this notion that he brings up at the end of the other, that came up in conversations with several guests and was very much at the forefront of my conversation with members of the class of 1956 as they reckoned with white privilege, both when they were students back in the 1950s and today, as they still fight for diversity and inclusion at Hamilton. This was a conversation with 10 men that absolutely blew me away. So take a listen to this little bit from the class of 1956.
Well, when Terry spoke to us, Terry Martinez, she made a point about other, and that in each generation at the college, there has been a new other. And I think that it's important for later generations to hear, that the experience of other was similar, and that other needs active work if you're going to resolve it on campus. If you're not going to resolve it on campus, it's possible, and I think looking at us here as a group, it's possible to resolve it through life experience after that. But it doesn't just happen. It requires work. And you said something that was wonderful. You said, how could that have happened to have all those Jewish roommates? How could that possibly be? And I've told the story here of going to President McEwen and telling him that, when I was a freshman, there were 5 rooms of 4 Jewish boys. And he said to me, how could that possibly have been? Now, did he not know? Was somebody else doing that? Or did he know, and was he not willing to own up to it? Activism, in my view, activism is very important. I have spent my life as an activist, and I'm not afraid of it. And we shouldn't be afraid of it. And the college should encourage it.
That's Danny Teitelbaum, class of 1956, talking about his experience as an other on the campus of Hamilton College. He talks a lot in that episode about his experience as a Jew on that campus in the 1950s and the limitations that were placed on him socially, inability to join a fraternity or not be invited to many of the social functions just because of his religion, being housed with all other Jews to keep them separate. Incredible, unthinkable stuff. But I love his point about activism and the passion for students today and whoever the other may be, as every generation has another. You hear Danny talk about the importance of activism. All of the members of the class of 1956 that I talked to, they want to see real positive change happen at Hamilton. So with that in mind, it was encouraging to talk to the Alumni Association president, Josie Collier, who was hell-bent on making positive change. It was clear from talking to her that she is dedicating as much as she can to fighting for any student, any member of the Hamilton community who feels like they are being treated as, again, another.
Actually, I'm so excited about this time right now because I've been doing this work for, as I was telling my daughter not too long ago, more than half my life, right? Like from the moment I stepped on the Hill, a couple of weeks in, I started joining organizations. I started talking about how I thought things could change. And, I saw a lot of mouth or lip service, if you will, and people just sort of promising stuff that never happened. And then I started to see some change, but it wasn't enough, right? So the notion that you could say, oh, well, at least there are more people of color now. That's not enough if when the people of color get there, they're horribly mistreated or there are tons of microaggressions, right? Yeah. Or, they'll say, we brought in more international students. Well, okay, but if the international students feel threatened or they feel like they're, constantly at, risk of being sent home, that's not okay. Or if we don't understand how difficult it might be for them when they can't go home, like some of the local students. I mean, there's a whole slew of things that people seem to forget because we're in a little bubble on top of the hill.
Yeah, absolutely.
Away, So now's the time where we can start looking at some of these things that actually Hamilton already has in place, but just need to be tweaked or need to be, exposed to certain folks.
So you hear Josie there talking about international students living with the fear of being sent home. And when she mentioned that at the time when I talked to her many months ago, my thought went to the Dutch roommate I had my first year at Hamilton, who after our first year didn't return for financial reasons, but nothing related to any kind of hardship or anything along those lines. He just ended up going back to school in the Netherlands and by all accounts has had a successful career in finance since then. But my conversation with Martine Kalau opened my eyes to what real hardship and what real concerns about being sent, quote unquote, home could really mean. At what age did you come to the United States?
I was 4 years old.
You're 4 years old. So by and large, I mean, I was going to ask you is at this point in college, did you identify more as an American or as an immigrant? I imagine coming over at 4 years old, your official status aside, you're walking around just thinking you grew up as an American.
I was an American. Yeah. I was like any other American who might be second generation. I mean, right. Up until my mother passed away, when I went home, we didn't speak English in the household, right? Because we spoke French, we spoke Swahili, Lingala, all the other languages that are spoken in Congo. But outside of the home, I spoke English. So yes, I was an American. And I had, this very eclectic and interesting ethnic background, but I was truly an American. That's the definition of an American, right?
Sure, of course.
It's a myriad of ethnicities and it's beautiful. And so, yes, I felt like the girl next door.
Yeah.
And I think for the most part, a lot of my friends and people at Hamilton thought I was kind of like the girl next door until they found out that I wasn't. So,
when you're going through that battle, the threat of deportation is hanging over your head, but you're just expected to go through life normally otherwise until your next hearing?
Yeah, it's kind of this is what makes the whole immigration, structure convoluted, and it's kind of a catch-22 because things that are so basic, like, let me give you an example. I was redirected to the Buffalo court system, right? Buffalo is a 4-hour drive from the college, College Hill. However, if you're undocumented, you can't get access, at least at that time, I couldn't get access to an ID, state ID, right? I couldn't get a driver's license. The only thing I had was my Hamilton student ID. So then how would I be able to actually use public transportation, right? I couldn't drive myself there. I couldn't get on a plane because because of 9/11 or post 9/11, that was, I wouldn't have had the proper documentation. There were raids being, rolled out on buses, on Greyhound buses. So I couldn't take the bus to Buffalo. So how would I have gotten to my hearings, right? So the same individuals that create these structures it just doesn't make sense. So how would I make it to my hearing? And if I didn't make it to my hearing, I mean, that would be grounds for me to be deported immediately or put in detention immediately. So I had to rely on the Hamilton community, college administrators, the president's office. That team was phenomenal and supported me, as well as some professors who really I was able to confide in. So it was like a sub community within the Hamilton community that really wrapped their arms around me and said, we'll support you, we'll take care of you. So they would drive me 4 hours each way to Buffalo. That's how I got to Buffalo. And then when I would get to the court, you have to provide ID to get into the building. And it's like, what are you talking about? This makes no sense, right? So this is what the average person who doesn't understand how this immigration ecosystem can literally be. It's a nightmare, and has this mental can really affect you on a mental level.
Right.
This is how, because none of it makes sense. It's so convoluted, and you're caught. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, and it's a catch-22. So I use that example to illustrate.
Yeah.
Yes, I was expected to go to master calendar hearings, which were, maybe once a month, once every 3 months. Very arbitrary, depending on when the judge wanted it. And it was very much of a call and response between the judge and whoever was representing me, my lawyer. So never really taking into account when I would be available or what worked for me. And then if it wasn't a master calendar hearing, it was an actual trial where I had to show up as well. So this stuff happened, sporadically, or every 2 months, every 3 months for 7 years. And every day I lived with the fear of, when's the other shoe going to drop?
Now, obviously, the presidential election was a major story in 2020. And among other things, it was a topic of conversation when I chatted with Professor Phil Klinkner on the show back in August. And I asked him what he thought would happen if Biden won. And, well, Professor Klinkner kind of nailed it. Is he going to leave when he loses?
Well, he's clearly attempting to muddy the waters for the election with all of this talking about
voter fraud.
And they've been doing this for years. In 2012, he tweeted out, early on election night, Romney had a lead in the polls on election night. And he tweeted out, typical Trump fashion, it's a travesty. How can you, lose the popular vote, and win the electoral college? Well, of course, he flipped that around in 2016.
Right.
In 2018, he complained about how, the late count in California. And in 2016, he complained that, millions of undocumented people voted, and that's why he lost the popular vote. So he's been doing this for a long time, and he's doing it now with all of the complaints about mail-in voting and this idea that maybe we should put off the election, the attacks on the post office, all these things saying that, the Russia investigation and then the impeachment essentially cheated him out of his first term. and therefore he should get more time on it. It's not like, where, referees in sports can add time on the clock for a penalty,
right?
Something like that.
Right.
So, and also it's just Trump. He can never sort of do anything graciously.
Right.
And he can never be wrong. He can only be wronged. So even if he loses 50 states and only gets 20% of the popular vote, he's going to claim, fraud.
Yeah.
Speaking of political film, there's a great scene in Citizen Kane where, he's running for governor and he's losing, and his minions at the newspaper have two alternative headlines.
Right.
Kane wins or fraud of the polls.
Yeah.
He's going to claim fraud of the polls. And he, whatever, if he has even a momentary lead on election night, he's going to claim, oh, that was it. And then all these, fake numbers came in afterwards and so on. And my concern is not so much that he's not going to leave, but that Biden comes into office and Trump's going to be out there tweeting every day and claiming it was fraud, that Biden is illegitimate. Republicans will go into full obstruction mode, which is what they did in 2009.
Yeah.
Even if Democrats win back the Senate, it's not clear they can get something through without getting rid of the filibuster, which doesn't seem likely. That we're going to be in a situation of very serious deadlock at a time when we have these multiple crises.
Yeah.
All of which you've mentioned, the pandemic, all the associated economic trouble related to it, all of the problems regarding police violence, and essentially that Biden will be so hamstrung by both obstruction in Congress and whatever resistance can be whipped up by Trump and others out in the country, that it could get very, very messy, even if Biden wins.
Now, obviously, national politics and the presidential election dominated the headlines in 2020, and rightfully so. But as has come up many times on this show, the importance of local politics, local government, is equally, if not more important. And that was something that we talked about with the first guest ever on the show, Matt Glassman.
If you're interested in political action, and I think Eaton Hirsch wrote a good book that came out this year called Politics is for Power. And the thesis of the book is that too many people in the sort of middle class and upper middle class, the educated class who wants to think about politics, too many of them have become political hobbyists. That is, they read Twitter and they learn a lot about politics and they, post something on Facebook or they sign a petition on Facebook, but they don't actually engage in the kind of work that changes outcomes in politics, that influences things, and they've forgotten how to do it. Whereas, a generation ago, most of them did know how to do it. And when people ask me, well, how do you influence politics? I always tell them, you just forget about the federal government. Just forget about it. And they say, well, what do you mean? I say, you got to get involved at the local level because that's the place where you can actually make a difference. And you can make a really serious difference right away. And the thing is, local politics has such a huge influence on people's lives, and they just totally forget about it. Yes, the decisions made in Congress are important. Yes, the amount of taxes you pay ultimately can be decided there. Whether we go to war can be decided there, things like that. But really, on a day-to-day basis, it's your local government, particularly your school board, if you have children, who's making decisions that are much more impactful in your life. Whether to raise the property taxes and pay the teachers more, or whether to change the curriculum in your school district, or whether to build a new school itself, has a huge impact on you and your family. And it's so easy to get involved in politics there. I always see people saying, well, I'm going to send money to Biden, or I'm going to send money to Trump, right? I say, you're wasting your time. Both the presidential campaigns are going to have more money than they know what to do with, and they don't need your $200. Putting your time and energy and money into local politics is just instantaneously going to help you influence things. In my town, this happened just last year. The town council was making some decisions about business zoning that annoyed a lot of people. And one guy started a Facebook group and, started just banging on it that people had to organize. And he started holding meetings, and all of a sudden he had 500 members and he ran for the town council and he blew them away. Simply because he got people organized around an issue. And he did the hard work of going and knocking on people's doors and talking to them. And you can't do that for Joe Biden. You can't. It doesn't matter, right? There's a bazillion other people who are going to do that. Who you can do that for is someone who thinks the curriculum at the school or the policies the school board is setting are outrageous and that someone needs to either influence them. If they won't change, needs to run against them.
And then following that up, I had a great opportunity to talk to New York State Assembly member Ron Kim, who has spent the better part of his career and better part of his life fighting for issues that affect people at the local level. And here he talks a little bit about some of that work.
One of the driving reasons why I've entered politics, was motivated to run for office, was to give people like my parents and others like them, immigrants, mom and pop small business owners, a voice that they desperately needed in the policymaking world. And I'm not just talking about just having more shop small slogans or having a once a month, once a week, like time to go shop small, whatever. I'm not talking about those type of gimmicks, but real policy changes to give immigrants, workers, and small businesses another shot, a real fair shot at achieving their aspiring dreams.
Your nail salon policy, you'll fight for that, was a famous example of that.
Right. The nail salon, we wanted to, the New York Times did an expose about how these small business owners were exploiting the workers, and all these stories came out that that's not the case. But the narrative was very strong again, and they were pitting the workers against small business owners, where most of the time the owners were also the workers. These are small mom and pop, like 3-4 people shops, and the immediate knee-jerk reaction by a fellow Democratic governor in New York was to impose this insurance product, what they call bond insurance, a product that no small business owner could afford. It was very predatory. It would completely annihilate immigrant small businesses, and opening space for only chain stores and the big retailers to come in the space. So we rallied, we fought at the time, taking on, that was the first time I clashed with the governor. And at the time, the governor was still very popular, and there was no nursing home crisis or any of the baggage that he has now. So it was very intimidating to take him on. But we did it, and we were running the issue. We had tens of thousands of workers and small business owners rallying with us in Albany to protest these draconian measures. So that was the beginning of it.
Now, obviously, the biggest story of 2020 was the pandemic, and that's a global issue. It's very much a national issue, but it's an issue that lives out and played itself out at the local level. It's something that Ron Kim talked about in his battles with the governor over the right sort of regulations to put in place to protect nursing homes. And it's something we talked to Amanda Daflos, the Chief Innovation Officer for the City of Los Angeles, about back in July. And I thought it was insightful to hear Amanda connect the two, the work that she and her mayor are doing at the local level, but connecting it to the importance of coordinated efforts between the federal and local government, and the challenges that have existed there, and why we find ourselves still in the situation we are in today.
Well, first of all, we have known, we truly, no matter what your political position is, I think it's a fair assessment to say that we really don't have national leadership. Because if we did have national leadership, regardless of politics, if we did have national leadership, that leadership wouldn't be leaving governors and mayors on their own, right? And governors and mayors are equipped. They're generally people who are on the ground, right? These are people who are at community meetings. They're people who are running large police departments. They're people that are running huge, agencies like a governor. But you have to have a coordinated response. And that means that all mayors, all governors are working together and not vying for things like masks or testing or doing what our office did. We set up our own supply chain around testing. We should not have to do that. We should be working with the federal government to do that. Mm-hmm. And I think from the beginning, it was really clear. I remember saying to my boss, no one is coming to save us. We are our own saviors. So we better act. And that's been what's been true. That all has prevailed in truth, not just in Los Angeles, but nationally. It's everywhere. So then you're left to, the leadership, the funding, the local engagement, media stations, like every local jurisdiction is basically on its own. Mm-hmm. And that is not a way to run a country of 330 million people, right? Like we're huge. Like you have to have some national coordination. And, even on masks, that was one of my first contributions here in Los Angeles, was doing all of the research on masks, because it's somewhat, to me anyway, seemed like common sense, right? Like having spent a lot of time in Asia, people wear masks in Asia as a practice, and it's culturally acceptable. But there was this like wave of opposition against masks, with the idea being that we had no US research on it. And I was like, well, of course we have no US research, because who wears masks in the US ever, right? We're blessed to not have to wear them. And the data is out there. I mean, the information is out there. When you look at historical research, in places like China and South Korea about what masks do, which is prevent things from going into your body. It may not prevent 100%, but it's going to be a barrier, and that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. And so all that research, led my mayor to say, like, yeah, this is a good idea. And so we announced masks, but the important thing was that the CDC and even our own public health department still were like on the fence about it, because there was no research in the US, which again, COVID came to the US after all these other places. So why would there be research here?
Right. But it's something as easy as wearing a mask, data or no data, why not? If there's a chance it's going to help, while we're trying to figure it out, why not be safe, right? And it's just, back to your point about the human condition, there's just some people who are going to fight just because they need something to fight about.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's unfortunately what's evolved with masks. But also we don't have any national position on it. In fact, the national leader goes to a place like Florida this week and doesn't wear a mask. Right. I mean, that is not good leadership, because what you're telling people optically is that it's okay to not wear a mask. And if we had a real leader at the federal level, whether you believe it or not, whether your own science says it or not, you just put the mask on, because not only because it's the right thing to do, because you're protecting people, because you're a leader and you're supposed to. Right. And that's what leaders do. They model the way. And we just don't have that, unfortunately. And so I think it's made roles like mine, like even more important in a way, because, as I fondly call it, not all that often, but like the data underground is, a lot of what has been shaping people's positions on this, because there's people like me who we have the access to the data, and we're, elevating it. We have people like my mayor who really is informed by data, our public health department, who we're publishing everything. I mean, it's really, it's remarkable. I have to say, like the pandemic, I've been my whole role has been around data and, design and elevating resident voices to try to formulate solutions in government that are better for people.
Okay, so it wasn't all heavy stuff on the show. One of my favorite things about this show is the conversations I get to have with people about their career paths. So many fascinating members of the Hamilton community doing interesting work. Like, for example, Dave Bliari, who's one of the top agents in Hollywood. And in my conversation with him, I got quite a few good stories. Good Bradley Cooper story in there, what it's like working with him. By the way, he's married to Alyssa Milano, some good paparazzi stories. And then there's this story, which might be my favorite story anyone's told on the show, and that's how Dave got his start at CAA.
So I walk into the lobby of CAA, and this is an old building. It was at 9830 Wilshire Boulevard, and it was an IM-Pay building. So you walk in, it's this big cavernous lobby. There's a desk where a person's, like a reception desk where you sat, where a person sat, and then couches. And I went in, I checked in, I went and sat down on the couches, and I was shaking. The cavernous lobby had its effect on me, where I was like, I was intimidated. And sitting there filling out a form that they gave me to fill out, some kind of application or whatever, I feel the presence of a person come in and sit down next to me, and I kind of don't even really glance up. I'm just filling out my thing, trying not to have bad handwriting and sit up straight. And I, in my mind, I was like, everything's a test. They're watching me. Everything's a test. And the person sitting next to me, I kind of picked my head up and I just said hello, and they said hello back. And as I sort of glanced again, I recognized that it was Natalie Portman. And she was sitting on the same couch as me in Los Angeles at the Creative Artists Agency. And I was like, well, this is a win. I was like, Natalie Portman just said hello to me. Like, I can go home right now. It's all good. And
you weren't like, oh, are you applying to be an agent too?
Almost. I was lucky I could get any words out at all. But she said, what are you writing? And I said, oh, it's a application. I'm here to apply for a job today. And she was like, oh, cool. And I said, what are you doing? And she was like, oh, I'm seeing my agent. And I was like, oh. And then I realized I had nothing else to say to Natalie Portman. I was like, I think I probably said something like, cool. And then went back to, now even more nervous writing my application. And Natalie got up. She went and used the restroom. She came back. She was like, you're still here. And I said, yeah, I know. I guess they're making me wait for a second. She goes, if you get a job here, you should tell them that someone is throwing, when people would take a paper towel and they'd open the door with the paper towel, but if there wasn't a trash can, they just left the paper towel on the floor.
Yeah.
She told me that someone had done that or multiple people had done that. And she was like, you should tell them that there's paper towels on the floor in the women's bathroom. And I was like, I will, Natalie Portman. I will do that. So then she went to her meeting. I sat there a little longer. I went downstairs, the basement, which is where HR was. And I sat with Arlene, who, as advertised, began telling me why I didn't want this job and why it was so hard and all the different things. And I kept saying to her, I do want this job more than anything, and I'm going to work here at some point. So we should just cut to the chase. And I was like, I think one of the things I could really help with is, for example, I just met Natalie Portman upstairs, and she mentioned that the bathrooms had paper towels on the floor because people were opening the doors and there was no trash can. I was like, wow, I could start tomorrow, and I will, I'll make sure that none of our clients ever see paper towels on the floor in the bathroom. And she sort of paused and sat there and stared at me, and she had these like crystal blue eyes, like steely eyes, just staring at me. And she goes, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've never heard a line like that. And she goes, we're going to find you a job here.
I ended up talking to several people this year on the show from the entertainment industry. I mean, who doesn't love hearing stories like that one? Or stories like this one from Ashley Merriman about what it's like to be on reality television.
I was working at this, I worked in New York for some years, and then the girl that I was dating at the time, she got transferred to Seattle, and I was pretty psyched about it. I was, having a tough time in New York, just like I make $9.50 an hour and I work 60 hours a week. Just like, so bad. It's so hard. Very hard to enjoy the city or anything that the city has to offer when you are living like that. And so we moved to Seattle, and I started working for some great chefs, and I was on a path of like, this is what I want, this is what I'm after. And so I got this job. I took my first executive chef position at this restaurant in downtown Seattle, and I started to get some local media attention. I got a great review in the Seattle Times. I got a great review in the PI. All the magazines in Seattle started to pay attention, and there's like a little bit of buzz. And Top Chef that year, they were coming off a really bad season, and where professional cooks started to be like, this show is just a joke. And the cooks that they get are jokes. And I think, but I don't know for sure, that this is like one of the first years they started to really actively recruit cooks and chefs. And so one day I'm, doing whatever in the kitchen, and someone's like, someone from Top Chef's calling. And I was like, shut up, just get out of here. I thought he was joking around, but it turns out Top Chef's in town, and they want to talk to me. And what I know is they talked to, the writers and the magazine editors and the people who had started giving me attention, and who's coming up, like who are the new chefs coming. And so that's how I ended up they came to the restaurant and I tried out. I did a private interview, and I didn't go to a big casting call. And I went to a private interview, and it just sort of went from there. So I went to a private interview. They came to the restaurant. They ate, the casting directors, and yada, yada, yada. I went on. So they called and they said, you go on. And again, I was just, I'm now, I guess I'm now 11 or 12 years past that, 10, something like that. Again, I just went into it like thinking like I was very naive going into it. So I thought you could go on television and be like good at your job and be a nice person and you would be okay. So just when I'm looking back on it now, I'm like, that is so stupid. And
well, they're looking for drama. They're trying to manufacture drama. I mean, did you find yourself watching it being like, that's not what happened? Or
I would say that they definitely had an editing angle, but if I had some coaching, or if I was coaching someone now, so people who now work for me have gone through some of these processes of like going on Chopped or going on, and it's very clear, like you just have to remember, like the casting directors and the producers and the directors, they have a job to do, and it's to tell a story.
Yeah.
And it's still definitely your story. The words come out of your mouth, but it's just like the questions you're asking me right now. So you answer the questions that are asked of you. Say like, hey, like I'm done talking about that. Forget all that.
Yeah.
So, they had a very clear story to tell about me. And unfortunately, the interview process, when you're in those one-on-one interviews, like, there's a lot of ways to, it's a very difficult environment to be in. So you land, you go to the airport, and you're like, I'm going to Vegas. And I found out about a week ago that I'm going to Vegas. And you go for 7 weeks. And you go for 7 weeks, whether you're the first one off or you're the last one off. And, the first thing they do when they pick you up is they take your phone, and they take your books, they go through your luggage. They, make sure that there's no recipes, and they just really cut off, and you don't have a watch, and you can't read the newspaper, and it's.
Are you going out of your mind? I mean, it's borderline torture.
It is, but it's all designed to get you to interact exclusively with the 16 other people that you're there with. So there's no, let me go read a book. There's no book to read. There's no television to watch. There's no watch to look at, phone to look at. It's just designed. And there's very long days. There's a lot of alcohol. And there's a lot of like, hello, I'm going to wake you up in the middle of the night for your one-on-one interview. So,
wow.
I take it easy on everyone who finds themselves in those situations. I feel a lot of empathy for them.
Yeah, I imagine. It's not a normal. It doesn't sound like a normal human experience. No,
it's not. It's not. And I think the people who do well in them and are successful are like unbelievably like talented humans. It's and everyone wants to know, like, wait, do you really only have 20 minutes? Do they really push, certain chefs?
Yeah.
You really have 20 minutes, and they really don't push certain chefs to win. Like, you win, I promise. Like, I really promise.
It was also interesting to hear from the likes of Paul Lieberstein and Celine Geiger about what it's like working in writers' rooms in television. And I thought it was really fascinating to hear them both side by side here. So here's first Paul talking about his experience working in some writers' rooms, and then immediately after that is Celine with a different experience. And does it take some guts to start pitching ideas and fear of getting shot down, or
in the room? It really depends on the on who's running the room, but I have worked in rooms where it was, you know, it was just ruled with terror. There was a show, The Naked Truth, which Chris Thompson, who's now dead, I think he had an overdose, but he was a troubled man, and he ran this room with just absolute instilling fear in everybody, and it fired there was so much turnover.
Yes.
I was only one of two people that year who weren't, two writers who weren't fired. And he would do a thing. He would be like in a bad mood in the morning, go to set, fire someone, and come back in a good mood.
Jeez.
It was just rough. But you can have I've had other very nurturing, you know, showrunners where you feel very confident, you know, right away.
And what's your style as a showrunner?
Pretty nurturing. Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
That was
learn your lesson, right? You have anyone who has a bad boss learns how not to be a boss. Right?
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
But I was on a lot of shows, you know, so I was able to kind of pick out what I liked and what didn't work. Well,
yeah. Is the experience you had prior to doing what you do now and becoming a writer, working in finance, did that inform any of your writing on The Office, of what it's like to be in an office? Because I feel like you need that experience to be able to write that authentically. And it always felt like there were some authentic moments in that show that you'd only know if you actually worked in an office setting.
Definitely. I think I used every little thing that happened to me in my short tenure in offices. But at the same time, I thought The Office it also was like any kind of group like that.
Sure.
You know, like a high school classroom felt very similar. With just this random person in charge who's often not very good at, you know, managing, and you're mixed up with random people, you know, who you didn't choose.
Yeah.
So I thought, you know, it was mostly an interpersonal show, and I think a lot of experiences from everywhere were able to inform it. Yeah.
Love Nancy Drew.
Right.
I really do love Nancy Drew. It's a really supportive group of people. I feel like I keep saying supportive. I've just
that's good.
It's just it's a really good room full of people. And my boss had her son is 8 months older than my daughter, and so it was really, really stressful. I was meeting people last season for staffing when I was pregnant, and you know, I made sure to show that I was pregnant because I had gotten a lot of advice from people that were like, hide it as long as you can because you don't want, you don't. And I was like, it's 2019. I don't want to hide it.
Right.
I think that's horrible. And so it was tough because you're wondering how you're going to be judged. You're wondering what the room environment's going to be once you get the job. You're wondering how you're going to be as a mom. I had so many emotions. I was a mess. And I met on Nancy, and Noga had her son and she was breastfeeding him in the room. And she was like, you are with your people. She was like, this is your place. And so, we had a nursery on set. They turned an office in our suite of offices into a nursery. And so she had her nanny with her son every day. And when we were going into the office, I brought my nanny and my daughter in every day. And if I needed to go feed her, go feed her. If I needed to, there was like a moment where she needed to be fed, and we were working on my episode, and it's hard to leave the room when it's your episode because you got to be there to talk about people. And I was like, can I feed her in the room? And, you know, room full of people, they're like, go for it. I'm like, you know, breastfeeding my baby in the corner of a writer's room while all of these people are, you know, at the whiteboard writing for me and helping me write down all of my ideas. And I was like, I could not have dreamed of, I didn't know that it was possible.
I'm going to guess that wasn't covered in your 1940s Hollywood class back at Hamilton.
No.
That was not a scenario. Like, it was a reality back then.
No. And I feel really lucky to be working at a time when I think that mothers and working mothers and we're at the forefront of making changes and making sure that women feel supported in every office space.
It was really encouraging to hear the positive experience that Celine had and has in her current job as a writer on Nancy Drew, I don't imagine that that is yet the normal experience for women in Hollywood. And as we heard from Selena Kopic, it wasn't always a warm and welcoming experience as a comedian for her when she was starting her career.
I'll never forget my first open mic that I did in New York. I was 26. I had only been doing stand-up for like 2 years, and I was performing like once a month and thinking that's doing stand-up. I was just so sort of naive. And the first open mic I ever did in New York, I was the only woman in the room, and there was probably 15, 20 men. And the host made a joke that they should lock the door and everyone have their way with me. Yeah. And then like I had to try, and all the guys are laughing, and I was like, now I got to go on stage and try to it's like I'm at work right now. I'm trying to also work out jokes, I mean, it really threw me off. And, and I've been sexually assaulted. Like, it really threw me off. And I was like, I'm just here also trying to work,
Right.
Like, and there's just stuff like that. I mean, and every female stand-up has stories like that where it's, it's people are like, it's so weird more women don't get into comedy. And I'm like, no, it's not.
Right.
know?
My God. I mean, that's an awful thing for one human to say, about another human. But then you just take it to the comedy level. The host is there to set you up. It totally just destroyed your ability to work the room.
Oh, exactly. I mean, yeah. And like, especially at an open mic, the host, like, we all know this is kind of a nightmare situation. Everyone's just working out jokes. The host, like, I have friends who've hosted open mics, and like, your job is just try to make this suck less than it, like, just try to like make this thing happen and not be so miserable. And try not to make me feel like I'm somehow, I mean, and that's why a lot of women feel like, we're either that we're not welcome in stand-up or that we're interlopers somehow. It's like, I'm sorry, men don't own stand-up, like,
sure.
I am also allowed to be here. And I mean, I've had so many young women come up to me after shows, young or old, and just be like, thank you. Like, God, there's, I mean, sometimes you'll see a show and it's 8 white straight guys in a row.
Yeah.
Like, it's just sort of remarkable how much so many bookers seem to not even think about a diversity of voices. Like, I don't know, how many jokes can you hear about like Dungeons and Dragons or masturbation, Like, I'm sorry. God. These are not universal themes. I don't have a penis and I don't want to hear more jokes about it.
Yeah. Do you feel like you had to sacrifice your material because of that? Or were you able to tell the stories and work the material you wanted to as who you are?
Well, I always was very mindful of, as a woman, if you tell a few dirty jokes, you are considered filthy. Like, men can tell dirty joke after dirty joke after dirty joke, and people think this is just comedy. But as a woman, say you have a 7-minute spot, if you have 2 dirty jokes within there, you're considered very dirty, So like, I also like, I always, my style of comedy, I like to try to speak in universal themes about very silly things. Like, I enjoy silliness. It's my favorite kind of humor.
Sure.
So like, but I just would always be mindful of like, okay, if I'm going to tell this one joke that even alludes to sex or alludes to hooking up, I've got to have 4 other jokes around it that are not at all about sex, and that, I think it's just a situation that men never find themselves in.
All right. And last but certainly not least, as I think back on this show from 2020, one of the things that continued to stand out to me is the love that people have for Hamilton College. And boy, did that come through in my conversation with John Werner. John had so much love for the school that I ended up doing 2 episodes with him because he had essentially an entire episode on the history of the school and fun facts and historical tidbits about Hamilton. But his passion for the school and really the passion for the NESCAC came through so strongly that he ended our conversation with a big idea and a challenge to bring together the NESCAC. So I thought I'd end this episode of one last look back at 2020 with a forward-looking challenge.
Okay, so the NESCAC schools, they started collegiate sports. The first baseball game was between Williams and Amherst in 1859. So when we think of NESCACs, we think of a league. It's a conference that was modeled after the Ivy League, and it was formed in March of 1971. That means it's a year younger than I am, and that means this coming March it's going to be the 50th anniversary of the NESCAC League. And the NESCACs are incredible schools, and you have incredible resources. They're just dripping with resources. You have these students. If you add up the average SAT scores of the NESCAC students at the 11 schools, it's 1320. The brain power of the faculty is just off the charts. The campuses are beautiful and have amazing, buildings and settings, and they have amazing alumni networks. Alumni that are incredibly proud of their schools. And these schools have endowments that are the envy of other schools. If you add up the NESCAC schools, over $500 million plus endowments, it comes to $16 billion. That's a bigger endowment than MIT. That's a bigger endowment than Penn. That's 2 Northwestern's endowments, and that's 2 Duke endowments, and that's Chicago, UChicago, Cornell, and UVA put together. So these are very special institutions with very special resources. Now, in this 50th year of NESCACs, I think it's kind of a bizarre year that there are no sports, that sports are on pause. Teams may be working out, but they're not athletic competitions. Mm-hmm. And I actually think there are a number of national emergencies, and they're like cascading, and that there's some issues right in front of us, and then there's some issues that are not in front of us that should be in front of us. And I'm wondering if the liberal arts education, the multidisciplinary approach that the liberal arts schools and NESCAC schools stand for, should be called upon. There's issues of equity, access, diversity. What's our society going to look like? Majority, minority, the future of race relations, privilege, Black Lives Matter. The systemic, challenges of systems. What if NESCAC students could come together and work on these? So what I'm suggesting is in this time when the NESCACs the sports are on pause, what if there's some grand challenges, kind of like Peter Diamandis, who went to Hamilton for a little bit, created the X Prize. What if there's solution summits where NESCAC community members work together to demo ideas, things that can really have impact? So I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think the NESCAC should be a 21st century collaboration, and that we should be more than the sum of our parts and punch way above our weight and be leaders for other leagues, not followers. And Dartmouth and Brown are dropping varsity sports so they can be more competitive in the sports they do have. Instead of NESCACs dropping football, because it's too expensive and it's 10% of your male class, why don't we add efforts around other disciplines that can help society? And, there's a trend with hybrid learning and accelerating remote learning, Zoom, because of the pandemic. Maybe this is the perfect time where you can get credit remotely to do these things, where you can take classes at different NESCAC schools as you're a residential student. And, 150 years ago, baseball was the first collegiate sport. I think now that we're at the 50th anniversary, I think the NESCACs should show some leadership. And I think we should think about how the NESCACs can be not just sports, but be coming up with innovative thinking and solutions. And people come to our NESCAC schools because of the access to this network and this activity.
All right, that'll do it. It was fun to look back. I got to meet some incredible people that I didn't know before. I got to reconnect with friends in ways I never anticipated. Heard stories of incredible journeys, and got to reconnect with that little school on top of a hill in central New York. And in doing so, got to talk to you every week. So thank you for listening. I hope you continue to listen, because we're back next week with all new episodes. There are still countless fascinating people from the Hamilton community left to talk to. So if those people continue to be willing to talk to me, and you continue to be willing to listen, we'll keep doing this. You have been listening to Had I Known on WHCL-FM, Clinton, New York. Had I Known show on social media, hadiknown.buzzsprout.com. As always, my thanks to Dr. Michael Woods for supplying the music on the show, and Doc will play us out. Hope you enjoyed the show. Hope you had a great holiday. Hope you have a happy new year. Here's to a great 2021. We'll talk to you next week.
Had I Known podcast show on your radio or take it to go.